To another episode. I don't know what that was. Oh gosh. Welcome to another episode of Becoming a Techno Wizard. And today we are continuing our series on learning Hegel. And yeah. Got a lot to cover, so let's just jump into it. Last time we talked about sections 94 through 97 of chapter 1 on sense certainty. Here is my summary. Hegel continues to show how sense certainty does not actually show us the essence of things. I'm sorry. Uh, Hegel continues to show how sense certainty does not actually show us the essence of things. It is assumed to show the immediate, unmediated truths, but in reality, it is subsumed by the universals. He shows this off with the concept of night, showing how a simple statement like now it is night quickly becomes a stale truth. Where it might have been true at the time of writing, it is likely no longer true whenever now is for you. In fact, this shows us that the concept of now is more true than any concept sense certainty may perceive, because now is always true no matter what is currently happening. But night is only true when you are currently experiencing, or when you're currently experiencing that it. I should probably say that. Thus, the abstract concept of now is more concrete than any sense of sense certainty, than any instance of sense certainty. Goodness. This is deemed as a universal or a concept that subsumes other concepts and yet are not those concepts. It applies in all situations and yet in none. It is an apparent contradiction, yet it is nonetheless true. This is why sense certainty is sublimated by universals because the senses require language to communicate and test, and that language mediates our perceptions. At least that's how I, summarize the last section. Let's see what Dr. Hegel says. See if I'm anywhere on track. He says the examination of what purports to be an immediate form of knowledge of things through sense perception continues, looking to see whether sense certainty is in truth how it purports itself to be, or as we purport it to be. Such an examination requires focusing on the raw this, which can be distinguished along temporal and spatial lines into a now and a here. Both now and here and actual sense perceptions are made more specific. The now, that is, as soon or as noon or day and as night. This reveals that in the apparently immediate, we already have mediation and negation involved. The this is really a universal, which is and is not the particulars. This allows us to utter or express the sensible particular which we are encountering in sensibility. Yeah, that's how we I think we're more or less on the point here. But he did use a little bit more big words in that one there. And then the bring up the here, the spatial in addition to the temporal. So yeah, I think we were one and one there, pretty close. Let's see. Now let's jump into the next section. So I'm going to share the screen here, turn that on, and let's get into it. Okay.
The same will be the case with the other form of the this, with here. Here is, for example, the tree. If I turn around, this truth has vanished and is converted into its opposite. No tree is here, but a house instead. Here itself does not vanish. On the contrary, it abides constant in the vanishing of the house, the tree, etc., and is indifferently house or tree. Again, therefore, the this shows itself to be mediated simplicity or a universality.
Yeah, basically a continuation of what we were saying before, but with spatial.
In section 98, Hegel is stressing to us that the very same dialectic that we went through in sense certainty with respect to the time or the temporality of the object, thinking about a this in terms of the now, and then realizing that the now can be noon or night or 3 o'clock or 11 to 11, whatever it is that we want. There's a dialectic involved in that shows us that things are much more complicated than we originally assume as we're experiencing them, as we're saying this is what is most real, this is what we know. Now when we turn to spatiality, it gets even more complicated in some respects, because with time you just have, now, and then it's going to be in the future, and that'll be a different now, and the time stream as we think about it is a whole bunch of nows. It can get more complicated than that if you have other theories of time. We're going to try to avoid that. But think about spatiality. It's not a continuum just like this way and this way. Already it's different than time in that I can move one way along the spectrum and another way along the spectrum, whereas with time, I'm constantly being launched into the future. The past is constantly receding behind me. I can bring it back in memory, but it's not the same thing. With spatiality, I can move forward, I can move back, I can go up, I can go down. We have 3 spatial dimensions. So we should think of space less as a continuum and more as something like a manifold. And what does that introduce for us? That introduces a lot more possibilities for...
Sorry, I'm not sure what he means by manifold. I mean, I guess it means spatial thing. I've heard the term, but I never actually looked it up. Manifold. Many various, having many different forms of elements, a pipe or jam. I mean, I guess. Okay, here we go. In mathematics, a manifold is a topological space that locally resembles Euclidean space near each point. More precisely, an n-dimensional manifold, or n-manifold for short, is a topological space with the property that each point has a neighborhood that is homeomorphic to an open subset. There's a lot of complicated stuff, but yeah, basically just a space, right? Area that you move around. Okay, cool. Okay, now I lost my tab. Sorry. Here we go. A million tabs up here.
Or what it is that the this, understood now in terms of spatiality, is here can be. So we see that same sort of dialectic playing itself out. We pick something that is substantive, that we can identify. We look at the tree. And as a matter of fact, I'm looking out the window at a tree right now. So we see the tree. And here now becomes that thing impinging upon us. Is that what the here really is? Is that what the truth of sense certainty is? No, because we can shift our perspective. We can turn away from the tree and now look at the house. Or maybe we only have to turn this far. Here it could be, I look at the door, I look out the window, I look at the camera, I look at the chalkboard. All of these are possibilities for that here. So we go through the same sort of progression, except notice in this case, we can even go from there to whatever else you like. Because look up, there's a light blazing in my eyes. Now I'm a little bit dazzled. These are all very different experiences. So none of them is really what the here is. He says all of these are converted into their opposite. If we look at the house is not the tree. It's also not the etc. If we look at the tree is not the house. It's also not this. And whatever this happens to be, whatever extra stuff we want to cram in there, that's not what these things are. So there's a lot of negation going on. He says, what's going on in this? Are we losing the here? No, here itself does not vanish. As we've seen with now, the here is what remains constant in all of this. The here is something that we can pick out with language. The here is also something that we're able to think. It is a universal, as Hegel says. It's mediated simplicity or universality, in this case, the this of the here. So he says, it abides constant in the vanishing of the house, the tree. As we move from one object to another, one experience of something external to us as being the here, or even something that could be internal, like here's a hand. Use, G. Moore and Wittgenstein's famous example, right? Anytime that we're doing that, we're dealing with something that is what it is and also is not what it is, because it is being provided to us in sense certainty and because of the mediating function of the here.
Yep.
Pure being remains, therefore, as the essence of this sense certainty. Since sense certainty is...
Oh, sorry, I'm looking that up. I think he said Wittgenstein. I have to look him up later. This is a good, way to find new stuff. As a person who's a filthy, casual, never went to college and nothing like that. I only really come across these things unless I hear it like in a podcast or something like this. So I try to keep it for the future. Good
demonstrated
stuff.
In its own self that the truth of its object is the universal. But this pure being is not an immediacy, but something to which negation and mediation are essential. Consequently, it is not what we mean by being, but is being defined as an abstraction, or as a pure universal. And our meaning, for which the true content of sense certainty is not the universal, is all that is left over in the face of this empty or indifferent now and here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is a short section. So yeah, I mean, not even.
In section 99, we're right at the cusp of a really important transition in sense certainty. And we're sort of bringing things to a close, or at least to a knot, as far as Hegel is concerned in this passage. So where are we beginning, or where are we starting from in this passage, from what's been happening in the others? The essence of sense certainty has been revealed as pure being. Now, why pure being? What we thought we were getting in sense certainty was beings that were manifesting themselves to us as being, as what is. And so in any given experience of that, we have more than one thing going on when we originally thought we only had one thing. So we think about the this, and then this already starts to split into here and now. Or it could be, if we wanted to, there and then as well. We could pick whatever sort of deictics that we want, or indicator words.
So I got it.
And already we've got a splitting, a Spaltung going on.
Sorry, spit up.
But it gets more complex than that, because as we've seen with the here can be a multiplicity of different possibilities.
It's not because he's talking too slow or something. It's more like when I'm like in the zone, I'm constantly thinking of all these other things, and so I have to like force myself to concentrate on this what he's saying. Otherwise, I'm gonna miss it. I'm gonna have to go back like 3 or 4 times. So speeding up helps me to just focus more.
Possibilities. It can be a tree, it can be a house, it can be the etc. The and so weiter that we have, or the now can be noon, it can be night, it can be whatever we want. So that means that these are universals, and universals we've seen have an interesting kind of not quality but status, as we'll talk about in just a moment. So what we've arrived at is the essence of sense certainty. What's really going on in sense certainty is that we're encountering pure being. But we're not encountering pure being in the sense of having some sort of intuitive grasp of the whole as such, or even with a particular object. I don't grasp the pure being of this chalk as just this piece of chalk, where my hand is just my hand. What is going on then? Well, the truth of the object, the truth of what it is that we're experiencing, is realized to be the universal. And the universal, like he says, has several important qualities that I've got sort of summed up here. It's something that can be said, so I should have put up there the word language. It's something that exists linguistically. It can also be thought, because we human beings have the capacity to think beyond just particulars and to form universals. What else? Can't be sensed. So strangely enough, while we do have to experience the here as this spot here or that spot over there, we can't actually see the here. The here only exists in the multiplicity of its particulars. It is and it isn't its particulars. It's not any one of its particulars, but it is all of them at the same time. It is what makes them the kind of particulars that they are.
And this is, I was reading the comments from this last video, and people were like, "Oh, what about the thing of non-contradiction and all this other stuff?" I don't know exactly what they were talking about, but in my own summary, I mentioned that like this is like it seems like a contradiction, and yet it is nonetheless, right? It's because, and it seems because, like we says here, like it's something in which we can understand, we can conceive of, and yet it's not like real, right? Meaning, like if I say here, it's not an object I can pick up. It's not a thing that can sense and taste. And when I say here, you know exactly what I mean, but it's not something that we can perceive. It's therefore it's like an. This is why he's saying before, like it's mediated, right? Because it's in order to understand the world, we have to distill it into patterns and information, in which itself, the information, right, is not itself existing. Their concepts, their mental models, their ways of you know um, um, communicating what we're seeing to ourselves as much as to others. And I can go like down the the rabbit hole with this one, because I've been reading a little bit more about how the brain works and consciousness and all that. But like the point here, like just real quick, this is a quick aside. There's another great podcast, another great Lex Friedman podcast, where he interviewed um a biologist, a really great biologist, what's his name, Levchin, I think. But he was talking about how uh we can see biology. In biology, you often see like these we often think about it, well, at least before, we kind of thought about it as like a system of like where things can be simply alive or dead, or not alive, or organic or non-organic, like a robot versus a non-robot. But he's studying these things called xenobots or something like that, where they're showing how you can create these organic life forms that are programmable, right? So therefore they're more like a robot, but they're organic, right? And he goes on to show how every aspect of our lives, right, every organic thing is made up of a whole bunch of other things, right? And in fact, you can even think of each of these things as having some level of sentience, or at least intelligence, right? In terms of that they have like some sort of goals and desires, right? It may not be as sophisticated as human beings, right? Like but the cells in your body do have a sort of goal and desire, right? Whether that be to reproduce or to do whatever its job is, right? And when those things come together, they create they kind of subsume each other's goals to form a new goal that is usually in alignment with all the goals of the things that made it up. So to me, this is a very similar in which we can have these conceptions, right? um but these conceptions are combinations of all the smaller things, all the experiences that we're having, all the perceptions that we're having, you know, coalesce, right, to come together to form this life form of this mental life form, right? This idea, these concepts and things like that, and that allows us to better communicate, to understand the world, and all this other stuff. So yeah, I really like this whole idea, and I don't know if that actually was as connected as I thought it was in my mind, but that's how I gotta see this stuff coming together. It's just very interesting to me.
So we've got this interplay going on here that we're going to see happening over and over again throughout the phenomenology. From certainty, we start being concerned with truth, and the truth helps us to illuminate what certainty really is. These are not exactly the same thing, but they exist in a complex mediated relationship. So now when we think about what that means, that we're grasping pure being, we're not experiencing pure being as such in the sensual, sensory type of way, but we are grasping pure being. And as Hegel says, and it's worth going back to the actual text here, he says, we're not grasping it in immediacy, because pure being is not an immediacy. It's rather something in which we find negation and mediation occurring, and not just occurring as kind of a byproduct, but as something essential to the way that pure being is. Now, this is a somewhat different conception of being than would have been proposed by metaphysicians in the past, like, say, Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas. And it's not quite yet, the being that's going to be proposed by other later metaphysicians as well. But this is a quite interesting notion here, isn't it? That pure being as such, that we encounter as the essence of sense certainty, involves negation and mediation at its essence. Now, he goes on, he says, when we're talking about being, or pure being, it's not what we actually mean when we say being. It's not what we intend. Meinen is the German term. He's going to play on words with that a little bit in a few passages down the line. But the meinen is, to go back to some of the other passages before that, that's what we were intending in relating ourselves to the object and in trying to speak it through language. We were intending it and we were also uttering it. We were either sagen or aussagen, the object. We were trying to express it, is another way to say. And so being is, in effect, not what we can actually intend or mean when we say it. Instead, it's being as an abstraction. So this is going to require some unpacking. He says it's being defined as an abstraction. The word there could be understood as corresponding to an abstraction as well, for which the true content of sense certainty is not the universal, is all that is left over in the face of this empty or indifferent now and here. What it is that we're intending and we're trying to express, and unsuccessfully doing so, in part because the very dialectic built into sense certainty is some kind of surplus that is more than just this empty, abstract form of the now or the here or the this. So we want to ask ourselves at this point, well, what is going on? What have we not attended to yet? Where else can we go with this dialectic?
If I can guess, it could be like probably a deeper understanding, right? Like with these concepts of a here and now and this, like you get a good understanding of our current, day by day process, but you don't really get to see, the progress, the shifts, the changes, and things like that. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
When we compare the relation in which knowing and the object first came on the scene with the relation in which they now stand in this result, we find that it is reversed. The object which was supposed to be the essential element in sense certainty is now the unessential element. For the universal which the object has come to be is no longer what the object was supposed essentially to be for sense certainty. On the contrary, the certainty is now to be found in the opposite element, that is, in knowing, which previously was the unessential element. Its truth is in the object as my object, or in its being mine. It is because I know it. Sense certainty, then, though indeed expelled from the object, is not yet thereby overcome, but only driven back into the I. We have now to see what experience shows us about its reality in the I.
All right, the sense of self. I guess you could Yeah, that's a
Now
big
in
thing.
section 100, we find that a very important reversal or shift of perspective is being charted out. And what's going on is a move from here to here. And this is what Hegel said has actually occurred at this point. We started out in sense certainty with a sort of priority of the object over the knowing subject in a sort of naive way, thinking that whatever it is that we're apprehending impinges upon us and imposes itself upon us, upon our consciousness, and we just sort of take it in. And the more passive, the more receptive we are, the truer and the richer that kind of knowledge will be. And as time goes on, we realize that that's not really the case. So we begin with the object over the subject, you can say. The object as what is essential versus what is inessential. It doesn't matter who the I is. As a matter of fact, if you get rid of the I as much as possible, the hope is, well, now you'll have this experience and you'll really be able to see things how they are. But what we find is that instead things are more complex. And what turns out to be inessential is first the object, which gives way to the universal, the now, the this, the here, whatever it is that we want to do, what we can name in language. But then there's another reprioritization that's taking place. The subject, the knowing, the thinking, the acting subject, the experiencer, is the one who's actually running the show. That's what's been going on all this time. So the way things were here actually has to be flipped back upside down, with the object now being a bit more complex and the subject as being what is truly essential. And what does that mean for us? Well, like Hegel says,
It reminds me of like the shift from the kind of mechanistic view of the world that a lot of science kind of utilized before. Well, even after Hegel, it was still very mechanistic, but into a systemic, systematic view of the world, where you see things less as like this deterministic machine and more as a systematic thing where you have this organic kind of flow of elements, and therefore the subject is just as important as the object, right? The subjective view is just as important in some shapes or forms as the objective view, because the objective requires you to question, how do you know it's objective, right? You can't just assume it's objective because you claim that you have good methodology. You have to go back and analyze that methodology to see, oh, actually, what you thought was right with this method was actually biased, or actually had this, that, and the other. And so what you thought was objective is actually subjective. And likewise, when you're looking at subjective, if you have a certain amount of subjective experiences, right, that seem to coalesce into the same type of arguments, from that you can distill an objective kind of objective-ish kind of ideal, or at least something that is very useful, a useful way to understand the world and how people roll, how people function. So I know he's probably not looking at it from this perspective here, but it just reminds me of that. And yeah, but definitely I like this idea, showing like how a lot of what we think to be like this the objects, right, the simple things. Oh yeah, that's objectively there, right? It's an object, that's the essence of things. But really, we don't really ever see the essence of things, because we're constantly going through this mediation. Therefore, it's less about these specific objects and more about the experience that we're seeing, more about these this universal, what makes these different ideas universal, right? These concepts, the universal concepts and things like that, and which we can try to build our foundation of knowledge on. I don't know, maybe none of that made sense. That's we'll see.
shown us that there actually isn't any certainty or truth in the object per se of sense certainty. That's where we actually thought we were going to get certainty. And when we explored what the meaning of its truth was, we found out that the truth turned out to be somewhere else, namely in the universal, and that undoes the certainty of the object for us. And we tried to be certain about the universal, but the universal isn't even something that we can grip onto and say, aha, now we've got it. This is the entire sum of what's going on in this process. The certainty of sense certainty, and here is the mystery of it that's now being unveiled, lies in the activity of the I, the knowing or the thinking or the experiencing subject. So that's a major shift. What this means is that the object has truth, or has its truth, the truth that is appropriate to that object, only as my object. Here Hegel is actually going to have a sort of play on words going on. He's using this German term meinen, which we've discussed already. And meinen means intending, what we're gesturing at, what it is that we have in mind. We've already seen the contrast between intending and expressing, aussagen. But it also has an affinity with the word that's used as a possessive pronoun, meinen. Mine. is the cognate in English, that which belongs to me. So by my intending something in what I am experiencing in sense certainty, I am making it mine. I am making it have the truth that I give to it. It doesn't simply have a truth in and of itself that it imposes upon me, towards which I have to be completely passive. Rather, I am actively engaged in this very process. To be able to see it under the guise of a universal, within the luminosity or intelligibility that a universal provides, I'm the one who's doing that, the I. And so sense certainty is not as...
I'm sorry, no, I'm pausing a lot, but this explains so much with like a lot of these. I want to say only just like the 19th, 20th century, philosophers and scientists and things like that. But even to this day, right? Even to this day, there's still a lot of people that's like that. That's like that wants to swear, oh, this is the objective truth. This is how the world works and everything like that. I would say that they're the authoritarian mindsets, but nonetheless, they have this idea that, oh, this is how the world works. They in like they're just trying to communicate the truth how it is. But in reality, they're imposing, right? They're intending, their own thoughts on the world, their own ideas of the world, even something that might have some, objective reality. Again, the objectiveness is only, in the concept, in the context of what we're able to currently measure, what we're able to currently understand, which may or may not, pan out to be objective, later on. But nonetheless, even if you're pointing at something that may have some sort of truth that we all can agree upon, the fact that you are perceiving it, right? The fact that you are trying to communicate that thing and understand the thing, requires you to put in your own stories, your own ideas into that. And then when you therefore go back and or turn around and explain that to other people, right? You are doing it through your own context. You're doing it through your own filter, right? And so if you go and try to say, "Oh, I'm just saying what what's the truth?" In reality, you're saying what you think is the truth, right? Which is very different, right? We all can agree that the truth and what you think is the truth is very different. But if you think they're the same thing, that's a problem, right? And I could probably pull up some topical examples, but I'll leave that for later, or for another day. But yeah, like this explains a lot.
As he says, overcome or aufgehoben. That when we see any use of this this word aufgehoben, aufhebung, or things like that, we ought to be thinking about whether a transition has happened going to the next stage or not, the next gestalt. And he's saying, no, it hasn't. There's still more going on here. Sense certainty has not been aufgehoben, but rather it has been pushed back. I should have left that there. I thought it was just some scratches. How ironic, huh? For what I'm doing here. It's been pushed back. Zurückgedrängt. It's, repressed, you might even say, into the I. The meaning of sense certainty now resides in the I, in the subject who is having the sense experience. So rather than the objects out there being what sense experience is truly about, it's rather what I am bringing to it, what I am contributing to it, what activity of mine it constitutes. So what does this mean for us then? Well, he tells us at the very end of this.
Should I move my screen?
It says, we now have to see what experience shows us about its reality in the I. What's reality? The reality of sense certainty, of experiencing things. What is the reality of experience within this I that now has assumed the kind of, shape or form of yet another universal, yet another abstraction? Because who is this I that we're talking about? That's a key, important topic that we're going to explore.
Because the I itself, that's another one.
The force of its truth thus lies now in the I, in the immediate...
Yeah, I guess he's going to cover it now. But like, yeah, the I is either, it's not me, it's not you. It's just like time or just like now and here or there and then. It's whatever is relevant to that specific moment, to that specific person, stuff like that. So inherently is a medium, right? The I is a medium to understand what we're actually trying to communicate with this. So fascinating, so fascinating. This is why it's so important to, like, sometimes being pedantic is not really pedantic, right? It's really important. So this is why philosophy is so important, because it seems like, oh yeah, obviously, when I say I don't mean like literally just me. I mean anybody that's used the word I, but like it's one of those concepts that, if you don't think about it, you can take it for granted. And if you take it for granted, you can easily be misled, manipulated, or just not understand what the hell, is actually going on around us. So yeah, interesting stuff.
immediacy of my seeing, hearing, and so on. The vanishing of this force of its truth we're going to explore. The force of its truth thus lies now in the I, in the immediacy of my seeing, hearing, and so on. The vanishing of the single now and here that we mean is prevented by the fact that I hold them fast. Now is day because I see it. Here is a tree for the same reason. But in this relationship, sense certainty expresses the same dialectic acting upon itself as in the previous one. This this I, see the tree and assert that here is a tree. But another I sees the house and maintains that here is not a tree but a house instead. Now, both truths have the same authentication, that is, the immediacy of seeing and the certainty and assurance that both have about their knowing. But the one truth vanishes in the other.
Great. Yeah, like I said,
I've remarked before that it doesn't take Hegel too long to start introducing new dialectical movements within, whatever it is that we've now achieved some sort of what appears to be sort of fixed static point. And that's the same thing that's going to happen now with the I in this section 101. So we've established now that the I is central, is essential to what's going on in sense certainty. And what we have now is a new immediacy. So whenever you see immediacy, by now you should, have sort of red flags going up. If Hegel says that there's something that presents itself as immediate, it's not going to stay immediate very long, because immediacy is never what truly is the case in the Hegelian system. But we've got this I who's now engaging in acts of sense perception, in seeing, in hearing, in other senses. And we don't have to worry too much about how exactly the sensorium works or anything like that, with inner senses versus external senses. We're not worried about that so far. What we're interested in is the fact that what this has achieved for us is it's attained a kind of status of providing a resolution to one of the problems. We've been concerned before about, when it came to the here and the now, the this of sense certainty, what keeps those what they are? What preserves their meaning? And we had them as universals, and that's fine, but what about their determinate content? Well, as it's going to turn out, what it is that does that is the I. The I preserves or holds fast or determines the content. If, where I look, where I keep on looking, that determines the here. The now, okay, time not quite so much. You have to do a little bit of stretching with this, but we can focus in on how we understand time. And Hegel says that this is actually an advance. So I determine the here as, say, a tree, right? I keep it a tree so long as I've got my eyeballs looking at it. So long as I determine what it is that my senses are taking in. Could be that I do that with my tongue too. I go up and lick the tree or something like that. The bitterness of the bark, or I'm scratching the tree and I'm listening to the sound of the bark and it's impinging on my fingers and I'm smelling the odor of freshly peeled birch or something like that. We can go into all sorts of details, but the point is the I is actually what is keeping this what it is. He says, I hold them fast. Now is day. Why? Because I see it. Because I'm there. It's day for me. Remember, we just had this thing about the mine and the intending, which is also mine. So he says, I see the tree and I assert that here is a tree. Now we end up in a problem, though, and we're going to introduce another wrinkle to the dialectic. And here, Hegel is in many respects prefiguring what is going to be going on in a much more famous passage that we'll get to, or much more famous section that we'll get to later on down the line, with self-consciousness, which involves consciousness of an other. Because you got to ask yourself, well, who's this I? Is it me? Is it you? Is it some sort of ghostly, spiritual I over and above us that we both somehow partake in, a la, the form of platonic man or human being or something like that? No, the I is an actual person, but then there's another I. Actually, a whole world of other I's, right? And that other I, he says, doesn't see things the same way. Well, I'm holding fast that, sense certainty, and here is the tree. That other I is saying, no, it's the house. Which of us is right? Well, we're both right, because we're both perceiving it. But then what's the truth of sense certainty? What is really going on in it? He says, well, he's perceiving that, you're perceiving that, you just have your own separate perceptions. Hegel's saying, no. The capacity for us to hold this fast opens up a vulnerability of our very own selves to others who can likewise hold it fast at the same time. He says, both truths have the same authentication, the immediacy of seeing and the certainty assurance that both have about their knowing. But the one truth vanishes into the other. And we see this happening when somebody says, no, you're wrong. What we're actually looking at is not a tree. It's a painting. And the one certainty begins to ebb and disappear. The truth begins to be lost in that of the other. We can do the same thing, by the way, with day and night. All we need to do is do something that wasn't available for Hegel at the time and communicate across time zones, right? If I'm communicating with somebody on the other side of the world and it happens to be day for me right now, maybe it's midnight over there. So the same thing can be done for temporal as well as spatial. And now what we see is we have to be concerned about the relationship between these two I's, which both seem to be the I of sense certainty.
That was good. I kind of want to jump into the next one, but I gotta get busy. Got a podcast to do, and I gotta get going. So, yeah, this was great though. and I really enjoyed this book so far. Really curious to see how it's going to go. But I like how, again, it's getting us to question, how we see the world and how we think we understand the world, right? We can't take things for granted, because that can easily have you misunderstand the world if you think that tree is, it's obvious that the tree is there, right? But what tree? You see a different tree than I see right now, right? um and it's important to understand these concepts, because especially nowadays, right? Because we're creating this world
Mhm.
where how we see the world, right, is what we're using to build it, right? As we build new technologies, new organization structures, you know um different ways of moving society around, right? Like, how we see the world fundamentally controls or influences, the type of world we want to live in, the type of world we are trying to build. And again, I could probably go all day about this, but like, just the biggest kind of and most recent one I've heard is one of those popular, I forgot his name, probably like Hobbes or one of those freaks. uh they were like, oh, nature is a thing we have to hold down and conquer to our, they said much terrible words, but like, nature's thing we have to hold down and conquer to our desires, or some really nasty thing. And they were basically making a metaphor, like comparing nature to some woman that you know get your way of. Like, this is how they like said, this is how they saw the world. And you can see that throughout the entire history of European colonization and things like that, right? It's very much justified how they saw the world, is that, oh, if you see nature, right, as something you have to conquer and you know get your way of and things like this, then you're going to facilitate ways of moving through the world in which are inherently violent, which are um domination based, and which are based on you just doing everything you can to get your way and forget the consequences, forget everybody else, because it's what you think that matters. And so, being able to realize that, oh, there's far more nuance about the world. We may not know everything, right? We may not know the truth of the world. We may not know the objective truth at any point in time. And so it's incredibly important for us to be humble, right? To utilize organizations and technologies and so on and so forth that increase this ability to express humility, that increase the ability to adapt once we realize that we're wrong, that increase the ability for us to learn more, um, rather than constantly getting more and more into our little filter bubbles and things like that. Like, this is why it's so important. But yeah, um, thanks as always for listening, for watching with me, for learning with me. Let me know what you learned, and I'm always happy to have a conversation about this stuff, or whatever. So stay tuned, hopefully next week, and we'll continue. Thanks as always, and have a great day. See ya. Bye bye.